Voters in West Virginia and Nebraska go to the polls in just a few hours. Donald Trump now the presumptive nominee, but was he inevitable? Joining me now to discuss, Ben Howe, contributing editor at Red State, and Norman Ornstein, we'll just call him Norm, resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute and author of It's Even Worse Than It Looks. My goodness, that's not a positive thing. But anyway, we'll take it. We like it. Norm, you say it's one thing to have a long-term senator outside of the party wing win a nomination, but it's another to have someone with no political experience coming in and stealing the show. So how did we end up here?
Well, in a lot of ways, we could see this coming over the last several years. In the book, Tom Mann and I, and there's a new edition, by the way, Don, called It's Even Worse Than It Was. And the next one's going to be Run for Your Lives. You know, we saw a Republican Party that was going off the rails, and we saw a group of leaders that had begun to promise people out there in the aftermath of the collapse and the bailout all kinds of things that they weren't going to be able to deliver. Bring Barack Obama to his knees, repeal Obamacare, blow up government as we know it. And the opportunity for an outsider or insurgent was just very, very strong. And going back a year ago, I saw every poll of Republicans of whatever stripe showed 60 to 70% support for outsiders and insurgents, 20% for the establishment figures. And Donald Trump, it was pretty clear, was the strongest and savviest at being able to tap into a lot of the angry populism out there and the distrust and distaste and dislike for the Republican establishment leaders.
Okay, so then listen, you said run for your lives. That's the new edition, or that's what's coming out.
Well, let's hope that's not what's coming out.
Specifically then, where is this anger coming from, Norm?
So a good part of it, I think, Don, goes back to the economic collapse and the bailout. We always get populism, and populism brings with it nativism, protectionism, and some isolationism.
Which is what we're seeing.
We're seeing a lot of that, and the nativism, let's face it, also has a significant racial component to it. I think you get a lot of people who are dislocated, they've had stagnant wages, they've lost their homes or seen their home values drop, they don't know where they're going in the society, and they see a country that is becoming, by 2% every year, inexorably, a majority-minority country. You put all of those discontents together, and we're getting the kind of populism that let a Ross Perot emerge without some of that edge in 1992 that Trump's been able to exploit much better.
All right, Ben, to you now. You say, quote, Donald Trump is my fault as much as anyone else's. Why do you say that?
Well, you know, for a very long time, just what he was just talking about, back in 2008 when TARP and the auto bailouts came out, a lot of people on the right were very upset. I remember very well when George Bush said that he had to abandon the free market in order to save it. That was kind of a clarifying moment for me, and I think for a lot of others. So there were conscientious people that came out that really did want to see a change in the way that government functioned. Government spending was too high, the debt was out of control, deficits were out of control. There was a desire for it to be less about Democrats versus Republicans. But there was an underlying element of people that were just angry and outraged, and I would say, in my opinion, a little less rational. They were always there, but they weren't necessarily leading the movement. I think in 2011 and 2012, my experience anyway, was when Romney didn't win, a lot of the more conscientious people they went home. I don't know if they gave up or if they just thought it wasn't working. The people who were left were this outraged group. And certain websites that I've been critical of for a long time, like Breitbart News, after Andrew's death, I think channeled a lot of that anger and found a way to sort of profit off of it. They sold ideas about what they thought politicians should be able to do, and then sold the outrage that they didn't do it, regardless of whether or not what they were saying should be done was even possible.
So they were doing it for profit.
Donald Trump,
they were exploiting people,
I
you
think,
believe, and people's beliefs and their anger. So then what do you wish you had done differently?
I wish I'd called them out. I wish I'd called the people out at these rallies. I wish that when I went to rallies in 2010 and 2011, and I had conversations with people and I agreed with them on 70% of what we were talking about, when they said that 30% that made me cringe and I kept quiet, I shouldn't have.
Interesting. Let's, Norm, do you agree with that? Do you think that people should have done things differently, that people should have called out, you know, as he said, some websites or some organizations exploiting people's anger?
I do think that, Don, but I also think there are a lot of other people who enabled much of this to take place. When Tom and I first wrote our book, and we basically said that the Republican Party had become an insurgent outlier, an awful lot of bloggers and other writers, conservatives, sort of rallied behind the party. They said everything's just fine, it's the same as it was. And when we saw a pretty deliberate attempt to blow up the governing process, vote in unison against everything, make every victory look ugly, make the whole government look so terrible, we had forces, including many in the mainstream media, who just shrugged at all of that. And you've got a lot of people out there now who say, how could anything be worse than those idiots in Washington, which becomes prime territory for a Donald Trump to emerge.
Yeah, to Ben's point, he said they gave false expectations about what government could do, could accomplish. So my question is, as you know, Paul Ryan made headlines last week when he said that he wasn't ready to support Donald Trump yet. He said he's hoping to get on board. So why do you say that a party who calls Paul Ryan a rhino is symbolic of the entire problem?
Well, for me, certainly, when you have the guy who is the most conservative speaker in the history of the House of Representatives called out as a rhino, a Republican in name only, not just because he said, I'm not ready to support Donald Trump, but also because he got behind a budget deal that raised the caps just enough that they could actually maybe pass some appropriations bills. And many in his own party are undercutting him on that basis. Almost anybody who's trying to do something to govern now is going to be called out. And at some point, we're going to have a reckoning in a party that is going to be a conservative party. It's going to be a party, I think, that Ben ultimately is going to feel comfortable with. But if you're going to basically be contemptuous of government and almost everybody who's in the opposition, including some in your own party, you're going to blow up.
I got to run. Thank you. We'll have you back. Great conversation. Thank you, Ben.
Thanks.
Thank you, Norm. See you next time. We'll be right back.
Thank you.